There's a particular kind of irony that follows great bands around like a shadow. The more perfect the music sounds to the people listening, the uglier the story behind it usually is. Nobody understood that gap between product and process better than the Eagles. From the outside, they were California incarnate, Silk Harmony's desert wind guitar lines, songs about freedom and heartbreak that sounded like they had been written by people who were genuinely at peace with the world. From the inside, they were one of the most combustible creative partnerships in the history of American rock. Fistfights were documented. Legal battles stretched across decades. Don Henley developed an ulcer before he turned 30 and attributed it directly to the pressure of being in the band. Glenn Frey once recalled standing on stage, singing one of their most beloved ballads while Don Felder leaned over and told him, quietly and without breaking his stage smile, that he was going to kick his ass the second the last note finished. 3 more songs until I kick your ass, pal. That is what it sounded like backstage at an Eagles concert. Here are 3 songs from their catalog where the hatred wasn't even hidden well enough to wait until after the show. The Eagles came together in Los Angeles in 1971, initially as the backing band for singer Linda Ronstadt. Glenn Frey, Don Henley, Bernie Leadon, and Randy Meisner recognized almost immediately that the chemistry between them could sustain something of their own, and within months they had signed to Asylum Records and begun recording as a standalone group. Their early sound was rooted in country rock, dusty, warm, and melodically accessible in a way that owed more to the Appalachian tradition than to the British invasion. Their debut album arrived in 1972, followed quickly by the conceptual Western narrative of Desperado in 1973, and by the mid-1970s they had built one of the most consistent commercial track records in American music. But success for the Eagles did not arrive quietly. From almost the beginning, the band operated as 2 parallel entities, a collective that produced music of remarkable quality and an internal political structure that was frequently close to collapse. The architecture of power inside the Eagles was never truly democratic, even when the members believed it was. Henley and Frey functioned as the band's chief creative authorities, making final decisions on arrangements, lead vocals, lyrical content, and which songs made the cut for each album. Frey has said himself that this structure emerged not from arrogance, but from a practical recognition that some members were stronger in certain areas than others. The way a football team assigns positions rather than asking everyone to play quarterback. The other members saw the same structure and drew a different conclusion from it. Randy Meisner, the band's bassist and one of its founding members, told interviewers he wanted more of his opinions accepted, more lead vocals, more creative agency. Don Felder, who joined during the On the Border sessions in 1974 and brought a guitar style that fundamentally expanded the band's sonic range, found himself consistently bumping against the ceiling that Frey and Henley had built. The tension was not incidental. It was structural, and it shaped everything that followed. The first song is Victim of Love, and its story is as much about the casualness of the betrayal as it is about the song itself. Felder brought the track to the Hotel California sessions in 1976 with a specific vision for what he wanted it to be, a hard-edged rocker built around one of his most aggressive guitar riffs, the kind of track that would let him step to the front of the stage for once and demonstrate that he was more than the technical backbone of someone else's lead vocal. He had landed his first Eagles lead on Visions from the previous album, One of These Nights, and he believed Victim of Love was going to be his moment to establish himself as a genuine frontman rather than a sideman. He recorded his vocal. He believed the take was good. Then one evening, while he sat across the table from the band's manager Irving Azoff at a dinner that, in retrospect, looks very much like a planned distraction, Henley walked into the studio and recorded the song from scratch without him. Felder's vocal was gone when he got back. Frey later explained the decision with a directness that managed to be both honest and cutting. Felder, for all of his abilities as a guitar player, was not a singer. Henley's version went onto the album. Victim of Love became one of Hotel California's most admired tracks, praised for its biting rhythm and Henley's commanding delivery. Felder heard something different every time it played. He heard the night the band decided, without telling him, that his voice wasn't good enough for his own song. The second song is Peaceful, Easy Feeling, and the hatred here came from a completely different place. Not for being pushed aside, but from the terror of inadequacy. The song itself was not written by any of the Eagles. It was the work of Jack Tempchin, a San Diego singer-songwriter whose composition became one of the cornerstones of the band's 1972 debut album and one of the earliest pieces of evidence that their sound had something genuinely distinctive to offer. For millions of listeners, the track became the purest distillation of the Eagles' early California warmth. Gentle, open, unhurried, the musical equivalent of a late afternoon in the desert with nothing to do. Glenn Frey found it almost unbearable to listen to. Not because of anything Jack Tempchin had written, because of himself. Frey hated his own vocal performance on the recording. He felt it was thin and technically insecure, that he had recorded it before he had found his true voice, that the take exposed a rawness and self-doubt that he could hear clearly every time the song came on. The irony was sharp enough that even Frey acknowledged it over the years. The most effortless-sounding song in the Eagles' catalog was a source of active discomfort for the person singing it. He described his take as too safe, and the discomfort he felt was not merely aesthetic. It was tied to a deeper anxiety that ran through the band's early years about whether they had actually earned the California mythology they were trading in. Were they legitimate inheritors of a tradition, or were they polished outsiders performing a version of something they hadn't lived? That question haunted Frey specifically, and Peaceful, Easy Feeling became the place he heard it loudest. He kept performing it at every show for decades because the audience loved it and the band's legacy required it. He just never stopped wincing when it came on. The third song is I Wish You Peace, and this one didn't just produce discomfort. It nearly produced a broken arm. The track was written by Bernie Leadon, one of the Eagles' founding members, and the person most responsible for the country and bluegrass textures that defined their early sound, in collaboration with Patti Davis, the daughter of future U.S. President Ronald Reagan. It appeared as the closing track on the band's 1975 album, One of These Nights, a gentle, hymn-like ballad about forgiveness and goodwill with harmonies that shimmered and a melodic simplicity that was completely sincere. Don Henley loathed it. He described it as smarmy cocktail music, the kind of lightweight country folk sentimentality that the band was actively trying to leave behind as they pushed toward the darker, more sophisticated rock of their later albums. He said flatly that nobody else in the band wanted the song, that it didn't meet their standards, and that its inclusion on the album represented exactly the kind of compromise they were trying to eliminate. Leadon disagreed with equal intensity. He had written the song with personal meaning attached to it, and he was not prepared to watch it drop from the record without a fight. According to Leadon's own later account, he made his position clear in terms that left very little room for misinterpretation. He informed the band that if they refused to record I Wish You Peace, he was going to break Glenn Frey's arm. He acknowledged the absurdity himself. The song was called I Wish You Peace. The method of persuasion was a threatened fracture. The band recorded the song. Not long after the album came out, Leadon left the Eagles entirely, worn down by the increasingly toxic creative environment and convinced that the band he had helped found had evolved into something he no longer recognized or wanted to be part of. He went quietly. His departure was significant enough that the Eagles replaced him with Joe Walsh, whose arrival effectively completed the band's transformation from country rock group to arena rock powerhouse.